Miss Mary. Turn with me to Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5. We're going to look at verse 21 down through the end of the chapter. However, this is going to be the first of a two-part sermon here. As Jesus is, if you remember back in chapter 3, Mark kind of did the same thing. He told a story inside of a story. And that's exactly what happens here, is he tells a story inside of a story. And so this week we'll deal with one of them, and next week we'll look at the other. But Mark chapter 5, verse number 21, it says, "And when Jesus was passed over again by ship unto the other side, much people gathered unto him, and he was nigh unto the sea. And behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet, and besought him greatly, saying, My little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. And a certain woman, which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse, when she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment. For she said, If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, Who touched my clothes? And his disciples said to him, Thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest, Who touched me? And he looked round about to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. And he said unto her, Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace, and be whole of thy plague. And while he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further? And as soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he saith unto the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe. And he suffered no man to follow him, save Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And he cometh unto the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and he seeth the tumult, and them that wept and wailed greatly. And when he was come in, he saith unto them, Why make you this ado, and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. But when he had put them all out, and taken the father and the mother of the damsel and them that were with him, and entered in where the damsel was lying, he took the damsel by the hand, and said unto her, Talitha cumi, which is being interpreted, Damsel, I say unto thee, Arise. And straightway the damsel arose and walked, for she was of the age of 12 years. And they were astonished with a great astonishment. And he charged them straitly that no man should know it, and commanded them something should be given her to eat. Now, as I said, this is a story inside of a story. We have the story, and I just want to say very quickly, if I say Jairus, it's probably going to come out Jairus a few times. I've called this man Jairus my whole life. And as I was studying through this week, I see that is not how his name is spelled. It is spelled Jairus. So if I say Jairus, I'm talking about Jairus, okay, just so you know. And so we have the story of Jairus and his daughter who is deathly ill and dies actually before Jesus even gets to the house. And then in the middle of that story, you have the story of the woman who had been sick for 12 years. And so there's an interesting juxtaposition here. You have the woman who has been laying sick for 12 years, and then you have the girl who was 12 years old and is laying there dying. And as we'll see at the end of next week, and as we just read through the text, that Jesus ends up healing both of these women. Now, after leaving the area of Decapolis, which is where Jesus was in the text prior to this, when he heals the demoniac, he was in the area of the Decapolis. Jesus then crosses back over the sea to the Jewish area. Now, we talked about this last week, where Jesus goes through a great amount of events and things that transpired, all to get over to the Decapolis to help and to save this, two demoniac men. And then after that, the people are unhappy with what he did, and they ask him to leave, and he does. And so in verse 21, this shows that really he spends no time over there. He goes over there, he's met by the demoniac, he casts the demons out, and then he leaves because that's what the people ask him to do. And so verse 21, he's back in the boat, and he's crossing over again, and he comes back to the Jewish area. Now, as was typical by this point, he is immediately met by a crowd that has become really par for the course in his ministry now at this point. We talked about this a few weeks ago. It said that he wasn't even able to sit down and eat bread because the people were thronging him so much. And so this is exactly what happens again. And so the text says that he was nigh unto the sea, there in verse number 21. And so he has barely even gotten across the water. He has barely gotten out of the boat. And the people are there waiting on him already. And so they somehow they know that he's there, but out of their desperateness, because that's what it was. These people were desperate to see a miracle or to have a miracle performed on themselves, or perhaps to hear some of the teaching. But they're desperate and they want the opportunity to see, to hear, to interact, or as we see with the case of the woman, just to touch him, just in some fashion. I need to get to Jesus because he is going to be able to help me. And so there's this crowd here that is desperate, and Jesus makes his way out of the boats, and he gets back onto the land. And he has met with two unique cases, and he shows again his great and complete authority. And we've talked about this already through the study. His great and complete authority over the physical world by two miraculous healings. Now, we have seen Jesus heal several times already in the book of Mark, but these stories are different. Again, Mark is setting out to show his authority to do the things that he did. That's why we get several of these stories. Chapter 4 ends with a lengthy story showing Jesus' unparalleled power over creation because he's the creator. And then chapter 5 begins with a lengthy story showing Jesus' unparalleled power over the demons. And now we have a lengthy story showing Jesus' unparalleled power over sickness and death. And so that's why Mark is just compiling these stories, because again, in chapter 1, verse 1, he's setting out to prove to us undefinitively that Jesus is the Son of God. And he does that by two means. He does that by, more often than not, showing us the deeds of Jesus, and from time to time giving us the teachings of Jesus. But as we've talked about, the deeds of Jesus are far more prominent throughout the book of Mark. Mark is an action book. Now, as I said, today we'll look at the story of Jairus. And we'll see his story today, and next week we'll look at the story of the woman who is unnamed. But here in chapter 5, verse 21, again, he comes out of the boat. In verse 22, behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet. Now, among many in the crowd that day, we don't know how many, but there was a crowd of people thronging Jesus, as it says there. In verse number 24, it says, much people followed him and thronged him. And so this is not a gentle crowd. This is not a docile crowd. This is not necessarily that they're hostile, but they are hyperactive, and they're trying to get to Jesus. And you can imagine probably some pushing and shoving and things going around because they want to get to him. Now, somehow, one way or another, Jairus does that, and he gets to Jesus. And so he comes, and he's described as being one of the rulers of the synagogue, and that is very significant, and there's a reason why Mark gives us that particular title. This would have been highly unusual, to the point that Luke, in his parallel account, Luke writes it this way, and behold, there comes a man named Jairus, and that word behold is a word that is used by biblical writers, basically meaning, hey, look at this, get this, don't miss this. And so Luke says, behold, there comes a leader of the synagogue. This is significant. This is important. And so Jairus, being a ruler, would have, by his position, he would have worked hand in hand with the scribes and with the Pharisees. He would have been hand in hand, and some may have even considered a part of the religious elite. And so he was, it wouldn't be out of bounds to say that he was at the least connected to, and again, some might even go so far as to say a part of, the religious leadership of the Jewish people. By being a leader of the synagogue or a ruler of the synagogue, he wouldn't have necessarily been a teacher per se, but he would have been in charge of the day-to-day business of the synagogue. And as we'll talk here in just a second, that was a crucial part of the daily life of a Jewish person, was the synagogue. And he would have been in charge of one of these synagogues as the upkeep of it, and probably would have been in charge of making sure that they had teachers there for the people. And they had people, teachers just traveling around. Jesus was one of them, traveling around from synagogue to synagogue, teaching and teaching on the scrolls. And as I said, Jesus did that as well. And so this man would have had a busy job, but by the nature of what he did, he would have worked with the leadership. And some, again, might go so far to say he was part of that leadership. Now, these are the very people conspiring with the Herodians, as we saw a few chapters ago, to take and to kill Jesus. That is their mission at this point. The religious leadership of Israel had one goal in mind right now, and that was, we need to get Jesus out. And the way they want to do that was to kill him. And so here you have Jairus, who is at least working with, maybe even a part of this particular group, but now there's a problem. Now there's something that has come up in his life. Things before, and we don't know, we're not told, but perhaps Jairus would have been one of those that was gung-ho about it. Yeah, we need to get that guy out. He's teaching things and doing things that ought not to be done in Israel. And yet now there's a problem that has arisen in his life. Now his daughter is sick, and he knows she's not going to make it, for that is the only reason that he is here today. And so he is here falling before, as it says here. Look at verse number 22. There cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet. He didn't just come hoping to have an interaction. He comes ready to worship this man Jesus, for he knows what he is capable of doing. Now, as we have discussed in the past, and we've talked about it a little bit, it is hard for us to truly understand all of the implications of the synagogue in the daily life of a first century Jew. Their whole social system revolved around these synagogues. One of the worst things that could happen to a Jew in this particular day was excommunication from the synagogue. One of the worst things that could be told to a Jewish person is you are no longer allowed to go to the synagogue, because that's where their teaching came from. That's where they socialized with other people. I mean, it was a crucial part of their lives. And so it was a no small matter that this man is here before Jesus. And we get the best picture of this in the book of John, in the Gospel of John, when Jesus heals the blind man. And the leaders are none too happy about this. And so they bring him in and begin to question him. And then they weren't satisfied with his answers. And they say, well, let's go get his parents, and we're going to question his parents. And then the book of John tells us that the people knew that basically anybody who's siding with Jesus are getting excommunicated. And so they bring in the parents of this blind man, and the parents dip and dodge these questions like they're a career politician, and they're not answering anything. And basically they finally end up saying, well, he's an adult. Go talk to him. Why are you asking us anything? And you say, well, why would a parent do that? Why don't they stick up for their kid? It's because they were afraid of being excommunicated from the synagogue. That's how important this was to these people. They loved it. It was a part of their very fabric of their lives. And so here is Jairus, one of the leaders of one of these places, now falling down before the man who before this probably would have been his enemy. Now, there is no doubt that this man knew exactly who Jesus was. First of all, just by the fact that he's here proves that he knows who Jesus is. The fact that he comes to Jesus for help, the only reason he would do this is precisely because he knows who he is and what he could do. There's no other explanation for the fact that he would come and throw himself before the feet of this man. Secondly, the fame of Jesus was spread all around this particular region, as evidenced by the fact that he had a group of people waiting for him upon his return from Decapolis. He hadn't even gotten out of the boat. There's already a group of people there waiting on him to get onto land. And thirdly, it's possible, and I think likely, that Jesus had probably been in Jairus' synagogue. As I talked about earlier, this is what Jesus did. He went from town to town, from synagogue to synagogue, preaching and teaching. We've seen some of those stories in Mark already. And so there is no doubt that this man knew the risk that he was taking by coming to Jesus, and as the text says, literally falling at Jesus' feet. Now, this man does what so many people do, even today, when they're desperate. They come to Jesus with a request. And this happens all the time, probably every day. In his moment of need, he comes to the need provider. And the interesting thing is, this is knowledge that's just built in to humankind. Because you can have the most staunch atheist, you can have the person who absolutely says that they do not believe, and when they get at the end of their rope, when they have nowhere else that they know to turn to, more often than not, people will, whether they think it's a false hope or not, they'll, as they might say, throw out a lifeline. We'll just say, well, let's just see. And they'll pray, and they'll ask. And, I talk to people who don't even believe in it, but they'll say that, in times of need, they would pray. And so this man shows that he, at the very least, had some sort of faith in Jesus' ability to heal his daughter. He tells Jesus, come and lay thy hands on her that she may be healed, and she shall live. That's what he's telling to Jesus. And so he understands the ability or the power of Jesus to do what he's needing to be done. And so it's in our moments of greatest need that we realize what we all know to be true. We all know this to be true. In fact, it tells us in Romans chapter 1, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness." It says, "Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it to them." And now the word hold means to hold back or to restrain. And so it literally says that they hold back and that they restrain the truth of God in their unrighteousness. Now that does not mean that people are walking around and saying, "I'm going to tell people that I don't believe in God when I really do believe in God." That's just telling them that whether or not they have ever come to the realization or admit it to themselves, they have a knowledge that is inside of them that tells them there is something greater out there. It's built into the very fabric of our universe. You look at creation and you understand that something is out there. Now, that doesn't mean that you know the truth about Jesus or that you understand the gospel, but that does mean that you understand that there is a greater force out there than what you realize on a day-to-day basis. It goes on to say in Romans 1, "For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even as eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened." And so they're looking out at this great world, and with scientists in particular. And I want to say this because this is what they study. They study the natural world, and they're looking out there, and they're seeing this world, and they're understanding that there are powers at play that they cannot begin to understand. And what they do in their mind is say, "Well, that can't be God because I don't believe in that. And so therefore it must be some other force." And therefore they come up with all kinds of theories and different things to explain away the truth that they know to be real. But they lie to themselves. Now again, as I say, I'm not saying that they're walking around and pretending to not believe in God. I think some of them really genuinely have not come to the realization that they believe in God yet. But the Bible tells us that it's built in us, that they know, but they are suppressing, they're restraining, they're holding back that truth. In fact, in Matthew's account of this story, after learning of her death, Jairus says to Jesus again, "My daughter is even now dead, but come and lay thy hand upon her, and she shall live." So this man who was at the very least connected to this group was wanting to take and to kill this very man. In the moment of his greatest need, he comes and he falls down at this man's feet because he knows you can do something about this. And so Jairus, desperate and in need, he pleads with Jesus in faith, in absolute faith, for him to come and heal his daughter. And so again, we see that Jesus responds to his faith by coming to his house. And I genuinely believe that that's why Jesus went. He was responding and acting in accordance to the faith of this man. Even in the midst of a mass of people, Jesus leaves to help this one man. Again, as we just talked about, he was not the only one there. There's a full crowd of people that is thronging Jesus, and yet this one man comes desperate and in need, and in faith of Jesus' ability to do this, and Jesus responds to that man's faith, and he leaves the crowd, and he goes with the man. So there's no doubt in my mind that there were many there that day who needed help in one way or another. But Jesus shows his immense compassion and his response to this man's faith, not only for Jairus, but for Jairus' daughter as well. So let's jump down from here, go down to verse 35. Verse 35, it says, "When he yet spake," he was talking to the woman, "when he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further?" So while on the way to his house, Jairus receives word that his daughter had, in fact, died. The messengers then ask kind of a pointed question here. Why are you troubling him anymore? Why bring him? It's pointless. She's gone. The reason that you left, it's over with. They knew Jesus had power. That's why he went. However, they didn't know the extent of that power. And as of this time in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus had not yet raised anyone from the dead, or at least we don't have the recording of it. And so they tell him essentially there's no sense in Jesus coming to the house now. It's very reminiscent of the disciples, and I'm going to go back to the story a little bit later, but the disciples in the boat as the waves are rocking. Again, they know that Jesus has power, but in this moment they're seeing this tremendous storm around them, and they're thinking, at least maybe a slip of the mind, I don't know, but or they just forget that they have the ultimate power in the boat behind them. Maybe they just think, this is too much. I mean, we know that he can heal and we know that he can forgive sins, but look at the storm. And so here these people are thinking, I know he can heal. I mean, we've seen him do that. The stories are abounding of this man's healing. And I know he can cast out demons and he can do all that. But this girl's dead. She's beyond a fever. She's beyond, a leprosy. She's dead. And so they say there, verse 35, don't bother him any longer. Essentially what they're saying is this problem is too big, too great for him to deal with. Now both these messengers and Jairus displayed a limited faith. Faith, but limited. Not that they had no faith. Again, they did believe that Jesus could heal her. But now the messengers look at the lifeless body of this young girl and they think it is beyond any power to bring her back. Jairus, twice it would seem, if you take all the accounts in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, if you add them together, it would seem that twice he implores Jesus that he must come to his house. He's begging, he's pleading, you have to come. And so, he believed that Jesus could heal. He displayed faith. But he believed he had to be there in person. You have to come to the house. You need to be there. You have to be in the room. You got to be able to see her and touch her. Now, it makes sense. I understand why he would believe this. Because, again, to this point, Jesus had done his miracles in person. He's healed people while they were there, right? He healed the leper in person. He healed everybody he was with. He cast out the demons while they were there. They were, with Jesus. And so, to this point, that's their understanding. Jesus probably has to be there with the person. And so Jairus probably believed that was probably required for Jesus to perform his power. And so Jesus responds with an incredible message of his own. He simply says this. He turns to this man and says this, be not afraid. Only believe. Now think about this. Think about where this man is. Again, he understands a little bit about Jesus. He knows that this man has power. He probably doesn't think that he can heal or bring a girl back from the dead. He's come and he's put his position on the line as coming from a leadership of the synagogue, coming to this man Jesus who the religious leaders hate. He's come to him. He's begged him at least twice to come to the house, and now he's gotten word that he's dead. His own servants are telling him, just let Jesus go. You don't need him anymore. Don't waste his time. And here he is. He's afraid. He's sad. He's brokenhearted. He's downtrodden. And Jesus looks at this man and just says, listen, don't be afraid. Just believe. And think about it from this perspective. I know we're not talking about this story this week. We'll get into it next week. But this man has implored Jesus, come because my daughter is about to die. And then this woman comes and touches the hem of his garment. And Jesus, while he's on the way to this house to help this little girl, he stops and he takes the time to deal with this other woman. Now think about this, and I know maybe we don't like to think about this from this perspective, but what if that were you? If you were Jairus, if that was your daughter lying on that bed, if that was your daughter that you thought was about to die, you've already come, you've put your recognition, you've put your position at stake to even come here, and you're pleading with this man, and he's agreed to come, and then now he's stopped. What progress he was making toward your house has ended. I would hope to think I wouldn't do this, but I think maybe a little part of me would think, Jesus, stop. Stop wasting your time here. She's alive. She's making it. You come help my daughter. But Jesus stops. He heals this other woman. He spends some time with her. We don't know how long. The text doesn't say. And then while he's still talking to the woman, in verse 34, he's having a conversation with that woman, is when his messengers come and say, she's gone. And it's in this moment that Jesus tells him, don't be afraid. Only believe. Jesus is responding to his faith. But he also knows that his faith is limited. I love this, because before Jairus speaks a word of sending Jesus away, he didn't even give him a chance to respond. He knows the situation. Jesus understands everything that is going on. He knows the servants have come. He knows the conversation they had. He knows they've told him just send Jesus away, and he knows that there's a chance that Jairus is about to do just that. And so before he even gives Jairus an opportunity to say anything, Jesus cuts him off and says, no, Jairus, don't be afraid. Just believe. We don't know if anyone around believed that Jesus could do this. We don't even know if his disciples believed he could do this. Again, at least for what's recorded, we do not see that at this point Jesus had done something to this degree. But all Jesus asked him was that he believed. Just have faith. He asked him to do two things: release his fear, cling to faith. Now, fear and faith, I want you to think about it from this perspective. Fear and faith are only compatible if that fear is the fear of the Lord. Fear of the Lord is absolutely compatible with faith. They go hand in hand. Otherwise, if it's some other fear, it's the fear of the world, it's the fear of the situation, it's the fear of loss, whatever the case may be. When fear creeps in, that's when faith leaves. Fear is what allows us to worry about the world. Fear is what comes in and allows everything to overtake us and make us weak and ineffective Christians. If fear can get into our lives and make us afraid of leaving the house, make us afraid of going out, I'm afraid to talk to my neighbor, I'm afraid to mention the gospel to my friend, I'm afraid to go out and live as a Christian, I'm afraid people are going to scorn me, I'm afraid people are going to make fun of me, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job, I'm afraid I'm not going to do all this right. When fear comes in, you stop being an effective Christian. And so Jesus tells this man, don't be afraid, because fear is incompatible with faith. It's just like, again, I talked about this a while ago, it's just like you see the disciples in the boat, afraid for their lives. Because of the fear of the moment. And listen, I understand why they're afraid. I wouldn't want to be in that situation either. Out in the middle of the water, again, we don't know how far into the sea they were, but far enough that they're getting rocked by the waves. The text says that the boat was full of water. And again, as I mentioned in the sermon, these men are fishermen who have fished on that water. They know this water. They know that they're in a deadly situation. Man, if ever there's a time to be afraid, it's there. But what does Jesus do? He doesn't say, listen, guys, I understand. No, he says, why do you have so little faith? Because they let fear creep in. Their fear of the moment took away their faith in the ability of Jesus to calm the storm. Later on, Peter is actually walking on water. Of course, not in that story, but later in another story. Peter is walking on water. Imagine that, to actually be walking on the top of water. You had to have tremendous faith in Jesus at that moment to do that. There's nothing else that could allow him to do that. But then what happened? Fear came in. Peter starts looking around, and I think all of a sudden Peter realizes, I'm walking on water. This is crazy. And he lets fear come in, and that's when he sings. Fear is incompatible with faith. Psalm 56:3 says, what time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. David Guzik said, Jairus was supposed to believe the word of Jesus. Everything else told him the situation was hopeless. But the word of Jesus brought hope. Now, this was a bold claim. As Jesus was saying, he was going to bring her back from the dead. There's no other reason for Jesus to tell him what he told him if the claim is not, believe, because I'm going to perform a miracle here. That's the reason why Jesus would make the claim or say what he did. Now, Luke makes this point clearer in Luke's account, in Luke chapter 8. He makes this clear because what he writes is this. Jesus responds, fear not, believe only, and she shall be made whole. And so Jesus' response to this man is, you get the fear out, and you live by faith, and I'm going to go do something miraculous. Now, Jesus now breaks from the crowd, and he makes his way to Jairus' house. He's getting away from everybody. Now, once there, interestingly, we see that only Peter, James, and John, above her parents, only Peter, James, and John are allowed to come in with him. Now, this is the first time in the book of Mark that we see this three. This three that becomes so common, Peter, James, and John. We understand those names. It's hard to even say one of those names without saying the other two because they just go together, Peter, James, and John. You see it all over the Gospels. But this is the first time in Mark, and possibly the very first time in the ministry of Jesus and in their ministry, that these three are set aside from the rest. Now, it's likely in this situation, I don't know all the reasons why, but I'll say it's possible. It's possible in the situation that there was really only room enough for a small group. He couldn't physically put all of the disciples in there, and so he calls out these three. Maybe that's why, but I think it was more than that. I think Jesus was beginning to prepare these three men for the ministry that he had for them. Now, we understand that these three, they're going to have experiences the others don't. They're going to get teachings the others don't. They're going to have time with Jesus that the others don't get. Now, of course, I understand that doesn't mean that Jesus loved them more. That has nothing to do with it. That Jesus was more fond of them, that has nothing to do with it. It's just that Jesus had a different ministry for those three than he had for the rest. That's the only reason. And so this isn't favoritism, but it is the most effective discipleship method. Jesus didn't have the same ministry for the 12. He had some for a ministry for some and a different ministry for others. These three's ministry was different from the others. And so Jesus had an effective discipleship method. You take a few, you train a few, and then they go out they take a few, and they train a few. That's the way that Jesus shows to us the example of discipleship. It's very difficult to do it within a large group. So Jesus takes these three aside. He trains them differently. He gives them teaching that's differently. He gives them experiences that is different than the others because they had a ministry that was different than the others. And so as they enter the house, we see that they come across people who are weeping and wailing greatly, as the text describes there in verse number 38. It was a common practice in that day for people to actually hire professional grievers. People would actually go around to people who had lost loved ones, and they would be paid to wail, to make a scene, to tear their clothing, to do all of this. It was a common thought that if there was not wailing and weeping and all of these things going on, that there was a disrespect to the person who had passed away. And so this was something, the family would say, we don't want any disrespect. We don't want, that to happen at all. So in order to go above and beyond the call of weeping and wailing, we're going to bring in professional weepers and wailers. It was common. It happened a lot. And so I think we can assume that at least some of these people, probably not all, but at least some of the people that are there probably didn't even know this girl, but they're there weeping and wailing because that's what they've been hired to do. And so Jesus enters this chaotic scene, and he simply asks this, why make you this to do? Now, imagine the scene. I got to imagine that some of the people that were there weeping and wailing were legitimate. People who loved this little girl, people who loved this family, people who knew the situation, perhaps maybe even some people who were there when this girl died. We don't know how long it took Jesus to get there. It's possible some others could have come after. But they knew the situation. They know the family. They love this girl. They know that she's gone. And then Jesus walks in. And as they're crying and weeping and grieving over this little girl, Jesus says, why are you doing this? It would be an odd scene, to say the least. Why are you doing this? Why make you this ado? Now, as I thought about this is immediately take me to the road to Emmaus. If you know the story in Luke, the road to Emmaus, after the resurrection of Jesus, Jesus just appears to two of his disciples who are walking along the road to Emmaus, and he doesn't let them know. He kind of hides his figure, if you will, so that they don't know who he is. They don't know that they're talking to the resurrected Jesus. But they're walking along the road to Emmaus, and they're discussing the events of Jesus' death, and it says in Luke 24, it says, and he said to them, what manner of communications are these that you have one to another as you walk and are sad? And so they don't know they're talking to Jesus. And Jesus comes up to these two disciples who, after his death, they're sitting there talking about the events and are sad and are downtrodden about everything that's going on. And Jesus says, why are you guys upset about this? Don't you know what has happened? And it's just a wonderful story, but it's very reminiscent here as Jesus comes in and says, why are you grieving? Why are you sad? Don't you understand that God is here? Don't you understand that something amazing is about to happen? In both situations, and here and in Luke, in the road to Emmaus, people were sad due to a perceived death. You see, people thought they were dead. However, in both situations, Jesus proved his power over death. So he makes a stir, because what happens is he tells them this, why are you weeping? The girl's not dead. She's sleeping. And then the next verse we see, and they laughed him to scorn. So he makes this, again, this bold claim. She's not dead. She's simply asleep. And this chorus of chaos had now turned to a cacophony of scorn. Luke adds that they laughed him to scorn knowing that she was dead. Who is this guy that he thinks he can come in here, tell us to stop mourning, and tell us that she's not even dead? We know she's dead. We're in the house. She's dead. This was ridiculous to them. They, again, as I said, they might have even been there when she died. They understand the situation. However, Jesus says she's sleeping. Now, this was a proper way for Jesus to refer to her, since sleep is temporary. Sleep is, in a sense, almost like a temporary death. You are unaware of everything that's going around to you. You're just kind of there, and yes, you are alive with sleep, but it is almost like a temporary death as far as your functions and your everything that's going on. You're just unaware. And so Jesus, for what he was about to do, knew that what happened to this girl was, again, temporary. The same concept is picked up later by the New Testament writers as they refer to the death of believers as sleep. This is a common thing in the New Testament, for again, that's what it is. It's temporary. In Acts chapter 13, it says, for David, after he had served his own generation by the will of God, fell on sleep, and was laid unto his fathers. And of course, we know in the great text in 1 Thessalonians 4, he said, but I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that you sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. And so over and over again in the New Testament, we see that the death of believers is referred to as sleep because it's not a lasting thing. It's a temporary thing. And we're going to see them again. And so there's no reason to refer to it as such. And so Jesus, what he does here is he sends them away in their unbelief. I'm telling you, she's sleeping. They laugh him to scorn. And because of their unbelief, he gets them away and he sends them out of the house. And so we see that the only ones who actually go in are the girl's parents, and Peter, James, and John, and of course, Jesus. The others, they don't get to witness the miracle because they didn't have the faith that the others did. After entering the room, Jesus takes this girl by the hand and he simply speaks 2 words. He didn't have to say anything. He has that kind of power. But he does this, I would imagine, for the benefit of those listening. Talitha kumi. I don't believe the emotion in the room is something we could ever begin to understand. Obviously, I've never been involved in a situation like this. To go from absolute heartache and grief to absolute joy in an instant. Again, I can't even imagine what was going through the minds of those parents. I mean, that's a nightmare. To think about losing a child like that, that is a literal nightmare. And God forbid that Beth and I ever have to experience something like that. But I can't even imagine going through this and feeling the emotion that would come with the death of your child. And there's no reason to believe that they're not feeling that. And then to hear Jesus say these 2 words, which simply, again, Mark translated there for his verse 41, being interpreted, damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And then to see your little girl get up, and not get up and be sickly and weak like she was, but to get up and just start walking around like she's just a normal 12-year-old girl. So the text says that, or at least it indicates that there's no delay, right? I mean, it's straightway the damsel arose. It's not a waiting act here. Jesus speaks, and she's up. And as I said, he didn't just bring her back to life as it was, but back to life as a normal 12-year-old walking around as though nothing had even happened. Romans 4:17 tells us, even God who quickeneth the dead, and that word quickeneth there simply means makes alive, who makes alive the dead, and calleth those things which be as not as though they were. That's exactly what happens here. And her parents, and probably the disciples, are understandably astonished with a great astonishment. Again, I go back to the emotion in the room, to go from absolute heartache to absolute joy, but also bewilderment. I mean, I probably the first thing that they felt was absolute joy and thrill that their daughter is back, but then to sit there and think, what did I just witness? Nobody sees things like this. Nobody has power like this. What did I just see? So Mark writes that they are astonished with a great astonishment. Now in conclusion this morning, again, really in verse 43, we see the compassion of Christ. As we know he didn't have to go to the house. He has the power, and in fact, there are miracles where he does this, where from a great distance he heals. He does not have to be there in the room. He simply could have told Jairus, there are many here who need my help today. I've healed your daughter. You can go home. She's fine. He could have done that. He could have done that. He has the power to do that. But in this moment, he wanted to be in the room. He wanted to be there with Jairus. He wanted to be there with Jairus' wife. He wanted to be there with the girl. He wanted to take this girl by the hand. He wanted to be there because he's compassionate. He didn't want to be uninvolved. Jesus could have raised her from the seashore, but he comes alongside the parents. He takes this girl by the hand. And then, let us grow closer to you.